What happens when a lifetime of cruelty and arrogance finally explodes? In the one place it never should. A court of law. A vindictive mother-in-law, believing she's untouchable, decides to publicly humiliate her ex-daughter-in-law one final time. She unleashes a vicious slap, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. But she made one fatal error. She never bothered to ask about the quiet, unassuming woman's family. And in that room, the one man with the power to destroy her entire world, the man staring down from the bench, was the victim's father. The Finch family crest, a gaudy monstrosity of a lion strangling a serpent, was etched into everything. The absurdly heavy dinner plates, the towels in the guest bathroom, and the oppressive, wrought-iron gates of the estate that Eleanor had called a prison for 5 long years. When she had first met David Finch, he was all charm, a whirlwind of spontaneous weekend trips and compliments that felt like sunlight. But the sunlight, she learned, was just a reflection. The real source of the Finch power and the Finch poison was his mother, Margaret. Margaret Finch was a woman sculpted from marble and vinegar. She viewed Eleanor not as a daughter-in-law, but as a temporary and deeply flawed acquisition. Vance? What an utterly plain name, she'd mused at their first meeting, her eyes cataloguing Eleanor's simple, off-the-rack dress. We will have to fix that. David, dear, take her to see someone. She simply cannot be seen representing our family looking so provincial. Eleanor, an artist with a quiet strength, had believed her love for David could weather his mother's storms. She was wrong. David, it turned in, was not a man. He was a beautifully tailored extension of his mother's will. The abuse was never physical. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, methodical erosion of her identity. It was Margaret, redecorating the home David and Eleanor shared, replacing all of Eleanor's chosen art with portraits of the Finch ancestors. It was Margaret reviewing their bank statements, questioning Eleanor's frivolous purchase of art supplies. David's money is for building his legacy, dear, Margaret had said, patting Eleanor's hand with a grip that could crush stone. Not for your little hobbies. Eleanor was given a stipend, like a child. Her own earnings from freelance graphic design work were immediately deposited into a family account to which she had no access. When she protested, David would sigh, adjusting his expensive watch. It's just easier this way, Elle. Mother handles the finances. She's brilliant at it. Why cause a fuss? The fuss, as David called it, was Eleanor's dwindling sense of self. She became a ghost in her own home, a prop for Finch family functions. She was expected to be adoring, silent, and impeccably dressed. The final fracture wasn't a snap. It was a detonation. It had a name. Sophia. She was a woman of Margaret's own design. Slick, ambitious, and utterly unbothered by the fact that David was married. Margaret had introduced them. At a charity gala, Eleanor, suffering from a migraine, had overheard them by the terrace doors. She's just so beige, Mother. Sophia's voice, like liquid smoke, drifted out. David needs someone vibrant, someone who understands his potential. Patience, my sweet, Margaret had replied, and the coldness in her voice made Eleanor's blood freeze. The prenup is ironclad, but a clean break is always messy. We need grounds. If she's not smart enough to leave, we'll have to make her. But Eleanor was smarter than they knew. She didn't confront them. She didn't cry or throw a vase. She went home, packed a single suitcase with her personal documents, her laptop, and the few pieces of jewelry her own mother had left her. She left the 5-carat blood diamond David had given her on the sterile marble countertop. She found a small, one-room apartment above a flower shop and filed for divorce. The Finch response was not negotiation. It was all-out war. The family's high-priced lawyer, Mr. Blackwell, immediately painted Eleanor as an unhinged, unstable gold digger. They froze her out of the family account, leaving her with pennies. They claimed the prenuptial agreement, which Margaret had forced on her a week before the wedding, meant she was entitled to nothing. Not a dime. Eleanor didn't want their money. She wanted her freedom, her name back, and the modest earnings she had contributed to their empire. But Margaret had one more card to play. She countersued, claiming Eleanor had stolen heirlooms and intellectual property, Eleanor's own designs, which Margaret had once displayed at a party. This was why she was here. This was why she was walking up the cold stone steps of the Boston Municipal Courthouse, her stomach a tight knot of ice and acid. Her own lawyer, Daniel Harrison, was a good man. A public defender she'd found through a legal aid service. He was overworked and underpaid, and he looked pale as he saw the Finch battalion arrive. David, looking impeccable in a navy blue suit, refused to meet her eyes. Beside him, Sophia clung to his arm, her expression one of smug victory, and between them, like a dark queen, was Margaret. Draped in a fur stole despite the mild autumn weather, she locked eyes with Eleanor across the hallway. She didn't scowl. She smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had its prey cornered, and it was the last thing Eleanor saw before the bailiff called their names. The courtroom was old, built in an era that prized intimidation over comfort. The dark mahogany paneling seemed to absorb all the light and sound, creating a pressurized, somber silence. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and old paper. For Eleanor, it felt like a tomb. She sat at the plaintiff's table with Daniel Harrison. His suit was slightly rumpled, his briefcase bulging with files. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's going to be okay, Eleanor. We have the bank statements showing your deposits. We have the emails. The truth is on our side." Eleanor nodded, but her gaze was fixed on the other side of the aisle. The Finch table was a fortress. Mr. Blackwell, their lawyer, was a shark in a $5,000 suit. He had 3 junior associates with him, all arranging laptops and leather-bound folders. David sat looking bored, checking his phone until a bailiff snapped at him to put it away. Sophia was beside him, having been advised by Blackwell to wait outside. But Margaret was there, seated in the front row directly behind her son, a silent, menacing presence. Her posture was ramrod straight. She looked, Eleanor thought, not like a spectator, but like a Roman empress deciding who to feed to the lions. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, cracking the silence. The heavy door behind the bench opened, and everyone in the courtroom stood. Eleanor rose with them, her heart hammering against her ribs. The figure that emerged was a black robe, nothing more. He walked with a swift, measured pace, not looking at the gallery, and settled into the high-backed chair. "Be seated." His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded immediate obedience. Eleanor had never seen him before. The case had been assigned at the last minute, a switch from the original docket. The nameplate on the bench simply read, "The Honorable Arthur Vance." Eleanor felt a strange, cold jolt. Vance, it was her name, her real name, the name she was fighting to get back. She hadn't used it in 5 years. She'd had no contact with her family in that time. It had been her choice, a stupid, prideful, youthful choice. She risked a glance at the judge. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a full head of silver-grey hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was already deep in the file before him, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was no flicker of recognition. Why would there be? She was just another name on his docket. "Mr. Blackwell, you may begin," the judge's voice rumbled. Blackwell rose, smoothing his suit jacket. Thank you, Your Honor. We are here today to put a stop to a frivolous and malicious lawsuit. My client, Mr. David Finch, is the victim of a calculated shakedown by his ex-wife, Ms. Finch. He said the name with a sneer. Her name is Miss Vance, Harrison interjected, standing up. She has legally reverted to her maiden name. This is on the docket. Blackwell waved a dismissive hand. Whatever she calls herself, Your Honor, the fact remains. She entered into this marriage with nothing, and is now attempting to leave with a portion of a family legacy she has no claim to. The prenuptial agreement is explicit. Your Honor, Harrison countered, his voice steady. The prenup, which we contest was signed under duress, is not the issue today. The issue is the division of marital assets created during the marriage, namely, Ms. Vance's own earnings, which were diverted into an account controlled by the defendant and his mother. We are also here to contest the countersuit, which is nothing more than a transparent attempt to intimidate and bankrupt my client. The judge held up a hand. Enough, gentlemen. I have read the briefs. Mr. Blackwell, your counter-claims of theft are ambitious. You have proof, I trust. We have the word of Mrs. Margaret Finch, Your Honor, Blackwell said smoothly, the matriarch of the family. She is prepared to testify that she saw Ms. Vance removing the items, silverware, jewelry, art, from the family home. Harrison shot to his feet. Objection! That is slander. Those items were gifts to my client over 5 years, or they were her own property. Sit down, Mr. Harrison, Judge Vance said, his voice flat. He looked at Blackwell. Slander is for the hallway. In here, if she repeats those claims under oath, it's called perjury. Be very sure of your next steps, counselor. Call your first witness. Blackwell, looking slightly less confident, nodded. The defense calls Mr. David Finch. David took the stand. He was polished, handsome, and utterly empty. He recounted a story that was pure fiction, crafted by his mother and lawyers. He painted Eleanor as emotionally volatile, prone to hysterics and extravagant secret spending. I loved her, David said, leaning into the microphone and giving the judge a look of earnest sincerity. I tried to help her, but she just got so angry. I gave her everything. My mother gave her everything, and she threw it all back in our faces. All she ever cared about was the money. Eleanor sat still, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She listened to the man she had once loved, the man she had shared a bed with, dismantle her character, piece by piece, with effortless, practiced lies. She felt a tear of pure rage and humiliation slip down her cheek. She angrily wiped it away. Across the room, Margaret Finch watched her, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She leaned forward and whispered something to her lawyer, who nodded. The judge observed it all. His face was a mask of judicial impartiality. He just watched, his gaze moving from David to Eleanor to the smug woman in the front row. He scribbled a note, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. Mr. Harrison, the judge said, your cross-examination. Harrison stood. Mr. Finch, you stated your wife was extravagant. Is it extravagant to buy groceries? Of course not, David scoffed. Then why was her credit card, the one tied to your family account, declined at a supermarket 3 times last year? I don't handle the day-to-day bills, David stammered. Who does, Mr. Finch? My mother. She's the executor of the family trust. So your mother, not you, controlled the money your wife was allowed to spend? The money she earned? It's complicated, David said, shifting in his seat. It seems very simple to me, Harrison pressed. Is it true, Mr. Finch, that you and your mother took your wife's earnings and placed them in an account under your name only, and then paid her a monthly allowance from her own money?" "It was for her own good," David blurted out, his mask slipping. "She's terrible with money." "Objection!" Blackwell shouted. "Overruled," Judge Vance said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The witness will answer the question. Did you or did you not take your wife's income and deny her access to it?" David's face turned red. "It was a family decision." "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Harrison said, sitting down. "No further questions." The judge's eyes lingered on David for a moment, cold and assessing. "You may step down, Mr. Finch." As David walked back to his seat, he passed Eleanor. He wouldn't look at her. He just stared straight ahead, a puppet whose strings had been tangled. Margaret, however, stared right at Eleanor. Her eyes were burning with a hatred that was almost tangible. The battle had just begun. "The defense calls Margaret Finch," Blackwell announced, his voice smooth once more. He had recovered from his client's poor showing, ready to bring in his star witness. Margaret rose from her seat in the gallery. She didn't walk to the stand. She glided as if she were approaching a throne. She took the oath with a theatrical gravity, her hand, dripping with diamonds, placed firmly on the Bible. She then settled into the witness chair, adjusted her fur stole, and smiled at Mr. Blackwell, as if they were about to begin a pleasant chat over tea. "Mrs. Finch," Blackwell began, his tone deferential, "it must be difficult for you to see your son's life disrupted like this." "It is heartbreaking," Margaret said, her voice a low, cultivated purr. She dabbed the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. "David is so sensitive. He gives his heart so completely. To see him taken advantage of by such a calculating individual. It has been the great trial of my life." "Objection." Harrison was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is character assassination, not testimony." "Mrs. Finch," the judge's voice cut through her performance, "you are not here to give a theatrical review of your son's love life. You are here to provide testimony relevant to the countersuit your family has filed. Stick to the facts." Margaret's smile faltered for a half-second. She was not used to being interrupted. She inclined her head. "Of course, Your Honor. The facts are that this young woman, Eleanor, came into our family with nothing. We clothed her. We housed her. We gave her a life she could only have dreamed of." Eleanor felt her skin burn. The life she dreamed of involved being a prisoner, constantly belittled and controlled. "And how did she repay this generosity?" Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength, turning from sorrow to outrage. "By stealing. She has no appreciation for history, for family. She took things that have been in my family for generations." "What things exactly, Mrs. Finch?" Blackwell prompted. "My great-grandmother's silver locket, a set of pearl earrings my dear departed husband gave me on our 20th anniversary, and a small, priceless painting by a French impressionist, a family heirloom." Eleanor's head snapped up. She whispered furiously to Harrison. "The locket was my mother's. The earrings were a $50 pair from a department store, and the painting was mine." "I painted it." Harrison stood. "Mrs. Finch, can you describe this priceless painting?" "It was a small seascape, very valuable," Margaret said dismissively. "And you're certain it was a family heirloom?" "Of course. It hung in our summer home for decades." Harrison nodded. He walked to his briefcase and pulled out a file. "Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit A. It is a dated photograph from Time magazine's Home and Design section, from 6 years ago, featuring Ms. Vance. She was, at the time, a promising artist just out of college. The photo shows her in her studio, and on the easel behind her is the priceless family heirloom she is accused of stealing. She was halfway through painting it. The courtroom was silent. A murmur went through the gallery. Blackwell's face had gone pale. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She must have copied it. A forgery. A forgery of a painting no one had heard of until you mentioned it, Harrison asked. And what of the locket? Can you describe it? It was silver, with a rose. And yet, Harrison said, we have 3 affidavits from Miss Vance's family friends stating they have seen her wear her own mother's locket, a silver locket with a simple V engraved on it, since she was a child. The very locket you claimed she stole from you. She's a liar! Margaret shrieked, her composure cracking, the mask of the refined matriarch melting away to reveal the rage beneath. She's a manipulative, ungrateful little tramp. She fooled my son. She tried to fool all of us. Mrs. Finch, the judge said, his voice a warning. No. Margaret was on her feet now, or at least leaning so far forward she was almost out of the chair. She pointed a long, bony finger at Eleanor. She came from nowhere. She has no family, no breeding. We gave her a name, and she repays us with this. She deserves nothing. She is nothing. Your Honor, I ask that the witness be restrained, Harrison said, genuinely alarmed by the woman's vitriol. Mrs. Finch, you will sit down and compose yourself, or I will have you removed for contempt, Judge Vance said. His knuckles were white on his gavel. Margaret, breathing heavily, sank back into her chair. Her face was flushed, her expensive hairdo slightly askew. She looked like a cornered animal. She glared at Eleanor, her eyes promising retribution. Blackwell, seeing his entire case implode, hurried to the stand. No further questions for this witness, Your Honor. He looked like he wanted to physically distance himself from her. Mr. Harrison? The judge asked. Just one, Your Honor, Harrison said, walking slowly toward the witness box. Mrs. Finch, you testified that Eleanor, Ms. Vance, came from nothing and has no family. Is that what you believe? It's what I know, Margaret spat. In 5 years, not one relative ever visited. Not a mother, not a father, not a cousin. No one. She's an orphan for all intents and purposes. A stray we foolishly took in. I see, Harrison said. He looked at Eleanor, whose face was a mask of pain. Thank you, Mrs. Finch. That's very illuminating. As Margaret stepped down from the stand, she had to pass by the plaintiff's table. She paused, leaning in so close that Eleanor could smell her heavy, cloying perfume. You will pay for this, you little bitch, she whispered, her voice a low hiss. You will not see a single penny. I will spend every last dollar of the Finch fortune to see you on the street. Eleanor flinched but held her gaze. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Margaret. That, more than anything, seemed to enrage the older woman. Her eyes flashed and her hand twitched, as if she wanted to strike Eleanor right then and there. A bailiff took a step forward, and Margaret seemed to reconsider. She straightened her stole, shot Eleanor one last look of pure venom, and returned to her seat. The judge called for a brief recess. 15 minutes, he announced, banging the gavel, his eyes fixed on Margaret Finch. The moment the judge left the bench, the courtroom's pressurized silence exploded into noise. David rushed to his mother, who was fuming, her face a blotchy red. Mother, what did you do? Blackwell is furious. You lied about the painting. I did what was necessary, David, Margaret hissed, batting his hand away. You are too soft. You always have been. That girl needs to be put in her place. Eleanor, emotionally and physically exhausted. Just wanted to escape. "Daniel, I need some air. I need to get out of this room," she murmured. "Go," Harrison said, gathering his papers. "I'll meet you by the doors. We're in a very good position, Eleanor. Her testimony was a disaster for them. Just keep your head held high." Eleanor nodded, pulling her light cardigan around her. She felt hollowed out, as if David's lies and Margaret's hatred had physically scooped something out of her. She just wanted this day to be over. She stood up and made her way toward the large double doors at the back of the courtroom. She didn't see Margaret detach herself from her son and her lawyer. She didn't realize she was being followed until a hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. "And just where do you think you're going?" Margaret snarled. They were in the small alcove just inside the courtroom doors. The gallery was emptying, but they were partially obscured by a large pillar. "Margaret, let go of me," Eleanor said, her voice shaking but firm. She tried to pull her arm away. "You think you've won, don't you?" Margaret's face was inches from hers, her eyes wild. "You think you're going to get away with this? You think you can humiliate me in a court of law?" "I just told the truth," Eleanor said, trying to back away. "You're the one who lied under oath. That's a crime." The word crime seemed to trigger something in Margaret. "You ungrateful filth!" she spat. "I gave you a life. I gave you clothes. I gave you a home. And you, with your fake art and your pathetic, imaginary family, you try to destroy my son." "Your son destroyed himself, Margaret," Eleanor said, finding a sliver of strength. "He's a weak man who hides behind your checkbook. And you're a bully and a liar. Now, get out of my way." Eleanor tried to push past. It was a fatal miscalculation. Margaret, in a blinding fit of narcissistic rage, saw her entire world, her control, her reputation, her power over her son, slipping away. And she blamed this small, quiet woman in front of her. "How dare you!" she shrieked. With a speed that belied her age, Margaret drew back her hand, her heavy diamond rings glinting under the fluorescent lights, and swung. It wasn't a small tap. It was a full-force, open-palmed slap that connected with Eleanor's cheek with a sickening crack. The sound was so loud it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The chatter in the hallway stopped. The bailiff by the door, who had been looking the other way, spun around. David, who had been approaching, froze in horror. Eleanor stumbled back, crashing against the wall, her hand flying to her face. The shock was so profound she couldn't even feel the pain, only a sudden, intense heat. A bright red handprint was already blooming on her pale skin. There was a moment of absolute, stunned silence. Margaret stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still raised slightly, her face a mask of triumphant fury. She had done it. She had finally, physically, put Eleanor in her place. She looked around, expecting... what? Applause? Fear? What she saw was the shocked face of the bailiff, his hand already on his radio. She saw Mr. Harrison, his mouth open in disbelief, dropping his briefcase. And she saw the side door to the judge's chambers open. Judge Arthur Vance had been walking back to the bench, his robe off, holding a cup of coffee. He had heard the shriek and the sound, and he emerged just in time to see Eleanor clutching her face and Margaret Finch standing over her, victorious. His face, normally a mask of judicial calm, went utterly, terrifyingly blank. "Bailiff," he said, his voice not a rumble, but a blade of ice. The bailiff, a large man named Sergeant Riley, didn't need to be told twice. "Ma'am, you are under arrest." "What?" Margaret shrieked as Riley grabbed her arm. "Get your hands off me. I am Margaret Finch. You can't arrest me. It was just a family dispute," She's hysterical." "It's assault, ma'am, in a courthouse," Riley said, his voice flat as he expertly spun her around and cuffed her hands behind her back. "David, David, do something!" Margaret screamed as the metal clicked shut. David just stood there, pale and useless. "Mother, Mr. Blackwell," she screeched at her lawyer, who was watching his retainer fee evaporate before his very eyes. "Stop this!" But Blackwell was frozen, staring not at Margaret, but at the judge. Judge Vance had not moved. He hadn't raised his voice. He had just watched as his bailiff secured the defendant. He looked at Eleanor, who was now trembling, the shock wearing off and the tears starting to flow. He took a half step toward her, then stopped, his judicial training warring with something else. Finally, he looked at the cuffed, sputtering Margaret Finch. "You have the right to remain silent, Mrs. Finch," Judge Vance said, his voice echoing in the now silent room. "I strongly suggest you use it. What is the meaning of this?" Judge Vance's voice was low, but it cut through Margaret's indignant protests like a scalpel. He walked forward, his black judicial robe forgotten in his chambers, standing in just his white shirt, tie, and black trousers. But he seemed to radiate more authority than he had on the bench. "Judge, this is a misunderstanding," Blackwell stammered, finally finding his voice. "My client is overwrought. The stress of the trial." "She assaulted my client, Your Honor," Harrison said, rushing to Eleanor's side, shielding her as she wept quietly against the wall. "We all saw it, in your courtroom." "It's a lie. She provoked me," Margaret shrieked, rattling her handcuffs. "She's a worthless gutter snipe. David, tell him!" David looked at his mother, then at the judge, and then at the floor. He said nothing. Judge Vance's gaze was fixed on Margaret. He walked forward until he was standing directly in front of her. He was a tall man, and he loomed over her. "Mrs. Finch," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, "you were a witness in my court. You lied under oath, committing perjury. Your lawyer and your son suborned that perjury. And then, in a place of law, you physically attacked the plaintiff. You are, without a doubt, the most appallingly arrogant and willfully ignorant person to ever stand in my courtroom." You can't talk to me like that," Margaret sputtered, her bravado faltering under his icy gaze. "I am. We are the Finches. We will have your job. I will have you disbarred." A strange, dark humor flickered in the judge's eyes. "You will? You, Mrs. Finch, will have me disbarred?" "Yes. When I tell the review board how you've handled this case, how you've taken her side, it's clear you're biased." "Biased," the judge repeated. The word hung in the air. "Yes, Mrs. Finch, I suppose I am." He turned away from her and looked at Eleanor. His expression, which had been granite, suddenly cracked. The cold fury was replaced by a look of such profound pain and concern that it made Eleanor's breath catch. He took a step toward her. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice was no longer the judge's. It was just a man's voice, rough with an emotion he'd held back for hours. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. The red mark on her cheek was already turning purple. She shook her head, unable to speak. The entire courtroom was frozen. David's jaw was on the floor. Blackwell looked like he had seen a ghost. Margaret, however, was just confused. "What? What did you call her?" Margaret demanded. Judge Vance ignored her. He looked at Sergeant Riley. "Take Mrs. Finch to holding. She is charged with contempt of court and assault and battery. Set her bail at $50,000. $50,000, Margaret screamed. "That's absurd." "Actually," the judge said, turning back, "let's make it $100,000. Cash, I suspect you can afford it." "This is an outrage," Margaret shrieked as Riley began to pull her away. "Who do you think you are? You're just a public servant. I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole city." Judge Vance watched her being dragged out, her heels scraping on the marble floor. He waited until the door slammed shut behind her, leaving a stunned silence. He then turned to the remaining huddle: David, Blackwell, Harrison, and Eleanor. He looked at David, who was shaking. "Mr. Finch, your mother has just been arrested for a violent crime. Your case, however, is a civil matter, and I am afraid I must, at this moment, recuse myself." "Recuse?" Blackwell said, seizing a lifeline. "Yes, Your Honor. Given the events, I must agree. You are clearly no longer impartial." "That is correct, Mr. Blackwell," the judge said. "I am not." He walked over to Eleanor. He didn't touch her. He just stood in front of her, his eyes scanning her face, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He looked at Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, please see that your client gets immediate medical attention. Get photographs of that injury." "Yes, Your Honor," Harrison said, utterly bewildered. "And now," the judge said, turning to Blackwell and David, "you may be wondering why I am recusing myself. Mr. Blackwell, you seem to be a man who prizes family and breeding." Mrs. Finch was very vocal on the subject. He gestured to Eleanor, his hand shaking slightly with a rage he was barely controlling. "Mr. Finch, you were married to this woman for 5 years. You lived in her home. You ate her food. And in all that time, you never once thought to ask about the full name of the father she was estranged from?" David's face was a mask of terrified confusion. What are you talking about? Her family. She said they were nobody." "She said we were estranged," the judge corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She didn't say we were nobodies." He pointed to the nameplate on the bench, sitting uselessly on the dark wood. "Read the name, Mr. Blackwell. Read it out loud." Blackwell squinted, his mind finally, agonizingly, putting the pieces together. "Vance," he whispered. "The Honorable Arthur Vance." The judge nodded. "Her name is Eleanor Vance. My name is Arthur Vance." He turned his full, terrifying focus back onto the pale, trembling David. "You are in my courtroom," Judge Arthur Vance said, his voice shaking with the fury of a father. "Your mother has just assaulted my daughter, and you stood there and did nothing." The silence that followed the judge's revelation was absolute. It was a dense, heavy thing, broken only when Mr. Blackwell made a small, choking sound. David Finch looked as if he had been slapped himself. His face, normally so tan and confident, was a sickly, pale green. "Your daughter?" he whispered, staring at Eleanor as if he'd never seen her before. "But she never. She said her father was a teacher, a quiet man." "I'm a quiet man, Mr. Finch," Arthur Vance said, his voice cold as the grave. "I was also a law professor for 20 years before I took the bench. Eleanor and I had a disagreement. 5 years ago. It was about you." Eleanor looked at her father, tears welling for a different reason. "Dad," she whispered. He held up a hand, not to silence her, but to steady himself. "I told her I didn't trust you. I told her your family's reputation was built on bullying and arrogance. She was young and in love, and she told me I was a cynical old man." His gaze softened as it met hers. "She wanted to prove me wrong, so she cut me out. She refused my help. She wanted to make her marriage work on her own terms, without her powerful father's shadow." He then fixed his gaze back on David. "It seems, Mr. Finch, you and your mother proved my point. Not hers. Sir Judge, Your Honor, I had no idea, David stammered, frantically looking for a way out. If I had known. Margaret. She wouldn't have. We deeply respect you, sir. You respect my position, Arthur corrected him. My daughter, you are happy to see treated like refuse. You sat on that stand, under oath, and lied about her. You let your mother call her nothing. You let your mother accuse her of being an orphan. You did all of this to a woman you vowed to protect. And just now, you watched your mother physically assault her, and you said nothing. I was in shock, David pleaded. You were a coward, Arthur Vance stated, as if it were a simple, undeniable fact. You have been a coward your entire life. He turned to the bailiff. Sergeant Riley, please escort Mr. Finch and his legal counsel from my courtroom. Mr. Blackwell, you will be receiving a motion for sanctions for your part in this performance. Lying on a police report to cover for your client, perhaps? Your Honor, I did no such. You were going to, the judge said, and Blackwell's mouth snapped shut. You were going to help them spin a tale about how Miss Vance fell or provoked a distraught woman. I know how your firm operates. Not this time. This hearing is concluded. As I said, I am recused. A new judge will be assigned to the civil case. But I assure you, my full, unadulterated testimony regarding the perjury I witnessed and the assault I witnessed will be provided to the district attorney's office by noon. Mr. Harrison, he said, turning to Eleanor's lawyer, I trust you will be filing a separate civil suit for damages. Daniel Harrison, who had been watching this all unfold with a kind of giddy disbelief, snapped to attention. Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely. First thing tomorrow. Good. Now get out, all of you, Arthur said, his voice weary. Except Miss Vance. Blackwell and a shell-shocked David scrambled to gather their things, their movements jerky and panicked. As they were escorted out, David looked back at Eleanor one last time. It wasn't a look of remorse. It was one of pure, unadulterated terror. He hadn't just lost a divorce case. He had made an enemy of one of the most powerful judges in the state. The heavy doors banged shut, leaving Eleanor and her father alone in the vast, empty courtroom. The silence was different now. It was hesitant, fragile. Eleanor was still leaning against the wall, the throbbing in her cheek a dull counterpoint to the wild beating of her heart. Her father, Judge Arthur Vance, stood in the middle of the room. The judicial anger had drained away, leaving him looking tired and, for the first time, his age. He looked at her, his face a complex mask of regret, love, and a pain that mirrored her own. You didn't come to me, he said, his voice quiet. You told me not to, Eleanor whispered, her throat tight. 5 years ago. You said if I married him, I was on my own. You said, don't come running to me when he and that dragon woman chew you up and spit you out. Arthur winced, as if her words were a physical blow. It was the angriest I've ever been. I knew what they were. I was trying to scare you out of it. You did, Eleanor said, a small, bitter laugh escaping her. You scared me into staying silent for 5 years. I was so ashamed. Ashamed that you were right. Oh, Eleanor, he said, his voice cracking. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He stopped, his hands hovering, as if afraid to touch her. To hell with my being right. He gently, his fingers trembling, tilted her chin up to inspect her face. The red-purple handprint was stark against her skin. His eyes, which had been so cold and hard, filled with tears. He let this happen to you, he whispered, his voice thick. They did this to my little girl. The dam broke. The 5 years of pain, of humiliation, of being controlled and silenced came pouring out. Eleanor fell into her father's arms, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she cried, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I'm so sorry. I was so stupid." "No," he said, his arms encircling her, holding her tightly as if he could physically put her broken pieces back together. He stroked her hair, his judicial robes and the cold courtroom forgotten. "You were not stupid. You were in love. I'm the one who's sorry. I'm sorry my pride kept me from calling you. I should have come and gotten you. I'm your father. I should have protected you." "It's okay," they both said at the same time, and they managed a small, watery laugh. "Well," Arthur said, pulling back, wiping his own eyes with the back of his hand, "it seems we have a lot to talk about. But first, let's get some ice on that cheek. And then, let's go see about bankrupting the Finches." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Margaret Finch's arrest for assaulting the judge's daughter in a courtroom was the biggest scandal the Boston legal community had seen in a decade. The story was on the front page of the Boston Herald the next morning, complete with a blurry cell phone photo of Margaret in handcuffs, her face a mask of rage. The Finch empire, built on an illusion of old money respectability, crumbled overnight. Partners pulled out of deals. Charity boards politely, and then firmly, asked for Margaret's resignation. The name Finch, once a key to any door in the city, was now a liability. Margaret, humbled and terrified, pleaded guilty to assault and contempt. Her $100,000 bail was a drop in the bucket, but the court-mandated public apology, 500 hours of community service at a battered women's shelter, and a permanent restraining order keeping her 1,000 feet from Eleanor, was a fate worse than death. Her power was gone. David, left without his mother's iron will or her money, much of which was frozen in the subsequent civil suit, was a ship without a rudder. Sophia, the vibrant new partner, saw the writing on the wall and vanished, reportedly last seen on the arm of a Miami real estate developer. David was forced to sell the estate to pay the legal fees and the massive settlement a new, impartial judge awarded Eleanor. The countersuit was, of course, thrown out with extreme prejudice. 6 months later, Eleanor stood on the sidewalk in a quiet, tree-lined street in Beacon Hill. She wasn't just Eleanor Vance again. She was Eleanor Vance, the artist. Using the settlement, which included full rights and back pay for her designs, she had opened a small gallery and studio, Vance Art and Design. Her own name, in bold, confident letters, was on the window. The gallery was full. It was her opening night. Her new series, Cages, was a raw, emotional exploration of her time with the Finches. It was powerful, painful, and critics were already calling it triumphant. She had healed. The scar on her cheek was long gone, but the one on her psyche was, too. She was no longer a ghost in someone else's house. She was the architect of her own. The bell above the gallery door jingled. A man walked in, his silver-grey hair catching the light. He wasn't wearing a robe. He was wearing a simple, slightly rumpled tweed jacket, and he was carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. "Dad," Eleanor smiled, walking over to hug him. "I'm not late, am I?" Arthur Vance asked, his eyes twinkling. "The traffic was terrible. These are for you." "They're perfect," she said, taking the flowers. "Thank you for coming." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, his gaze sweeping the crowded room. He looked at the paintings. He looked at the people admiring them. He looked at his daughter, vibrant and strong, her face alive with passion and purpose. "You know," Arthur said, his voice low, "I see you're serving wine. I hope you have a permit for that." Eleanor laughed, a real, full-bodied laugh. "Don't you start, Judge. I have all my papers in order." "I have no doubt," he said. He raised the plastic cup of wine she'd handed him. "A toast to my daughter, the strongest, bravest woman I know. You took all the pain they gave you, and you made it into art." "To us," Eleanor said, clinking her cup against his. "To new beginnings." Across the city, in a small rented condo, Margaret Finch read the glowing review of the art show in the paper. She threw the paper into the fireplace, her hands shaking. But there was no fire, and she was alone. The only sound was the ticking of a clock, measuring out her empty, quiet days. Eleanor, surrounded by friends and her father, didn't look back. She was finally and completely free. 1 year to the day after her gallery opened, Eleanor was hosting its anniversary celebration. The space, which had once felt bravely optimistic, now felt confidently established. It was packed not just with friends, but with the city's most influential art buyers, critics, and collectors. Her Cages series had sold out within 2 months. Her new work, Emancipation, a vibrant, joyful collection using bold colors and light, was being hailed as a masterpiece of personal triumph. Eleanor moved through the crowd, not as a victim, but as a presence. She was dressed in a stunning, deep blue dress, her hair cut into a chic, confident style. She was laughing, her head tossed back, as a new man, a kind architect named Mark, whispered something in her ear. He held her hand with an easy, gentle respect that was still, at times, a quiet revelation to her. Her father was there, of course. Arthur Vance was holding court by the wine bar, deep in a debate with an art critic about the merits of postmodernism. He looked happy. The hard, granite-like lines of the courtroom had softened, replaced by a father's simple, profound pride. He caught Eleanor's eye from across the room and raised his glass. She beamed, raising hers in return. The bell above the gallery door jingled, but it was lost in the happy din of the party. A man stood just inside the doorway, hesitating. He was thin, and his suit, while once expensive, hung on him, the fabric dull and slightly worn at the cuffs. He looked like a ghost, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and haunted. It was David Finch. He watched Eleanor for a long moment. He saw her success. He saw the respect she commanded. He saw the way the new man looked at her, the way her father protected her. He saw, in short, everything he had been taught to value and everything he had thrown away. His life was a mirror image of hers. After the lawsuit and the criminal proceedings, the Finch name was not just a liability, it was poison. He had lost the estate, his trust fund, drained by legal fees and the civil settlement, and his friends, who had scattered like roaches in the light. He was currently working as a mid-level data entry clerk, a job a distant cousin had given him out of pity, under a different name. He lived in a small, rented room above a laundromat. He had tried to see his mother. Margaret was serving out the last of her parole. She lived in a government-subsidized apartment, a bitter, broken woman who blamed him, Eleanor, and the judge for her downfall. She had thrown a glass of water in his face and told him she never wanted to see her weak-willed son again. He saw Eleanor, and in a desperate, last-ditch surge of Finch entitlement, he thought, maybe she would pity him. He took a step forward, and then another, walking into the bright, warm light of her new life. "Eleanor." His voice was thin, and at first she didn't hear him. Eleanor," he said, louder. The chatter around her died. Mark and her father turned. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but it froze, becoming a polite, professional mask. She turned, her eyes clear and completely devoid of fear. "David," she said. Her voice was cool, steady. I'm surprised to see you here. This is a private, ticketed event. I know. He stammered, his eyes darting to Mark, then to Arthur, who was already starting to move towards them. Eleanor put up a single, subtle hand to stop her father. She would handle this. You look, David said, gesturing weakly at the gallery, at her. You've done well. I have, she said. Was there something you needed? Or did you just come to disrupt my night? No, he said, taking a step closer. I came to apologize. I never got the chance. What my mother did, what I let happen. I was wrong, Elle. I was a fool. Yes, you were, Eleanor said simply. Apology noted. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have guests. She turned to walk away. Wait, he said, desperation making his voice crack. He grabbed her arm. It was the lightest of touches, but it was the same arm Margaret had grabbed. The entire room went silent. Mark was at her side in an instant, and Arthur's face became the face of the judge, cold and furious. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just looked down at his hand on her arm, and then back up at his face, with an expression of profound, weary pity. Let go of me, David, she said, her voice quiet, but with a core of steel. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Elle, please, I'm ruined, I have nothing, I'm begging you, for old time's sake. I just need a little help. Eleanor stared at him, the last lingering shadow of the woman she had been finally vanishing. She saw him for what he was, not a monster, but a weak, hollow man, a shell built by a terrible woman. The you I knew, David, never existed. He was a lie, she said, and the me you knew is gone. I cannot help you. You are a stranger to me, and you are trespassing. Please leave, now. She turned her back on him, definitively. She took Mark's arm. Would you get me a glass of water? Arthur Vance stepped into the space she had vacated. He stood in front of David, a wall of quiet, implacable authority. Mr. Finch, the judge said, his voice a low rumble. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave this gallery under your own power. After that, I will have you removed. And I assure you, you will not enjoy the experience. David stared at the man who had destroyed his family, who had taken his wife, and who was now standing in a temple of his own failure. He saw no mercy. He saw no weakness. He saw only the gavel and the end of the road. He turned and fled, stumbling out of the bright, warm gallery and into the cold, dark street. He didn't look back. Eleanor watched his reflection disappear from the window. She took a deep breath, and the last of the tension left her. Her father came to her side, his hand on her shoulder. Are you all right, my girl? Arthur asked. Eleanor smiled, a real, genuine smile. She reached up and covered his hand with her own. I am, she said. I really, truly am. She turned back to her party, to her life, and to the future, leaving the ghosts of the past to the shadows where they belonged. And that's a wrap on this incredible story of karma and justice. It's a wild ride, but it just goes to show you that you never truly know who you're messing with. Margaret Finch learned the hard way that arrogance and cruelty always have a price. She thought she was slapping a nobody when, in reality, she was sealing her own fate in front of the one man who held all the cards. What a powerful, satisfying twist. What did you think of that ending? Was that the sweetest karma you've ever heard? Let me know your favorite part of the story in the comments below. If you love stories where the wicked get exactly what they deserve, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another dramatic, real-life story. We post new videos every single week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening. The doors of the exclusive Lenox Hill maternity ward slid open, but it wasn't a doctor. It was a nightmare. What happens when a billionaire's mistress, fueled by betrayal, confronts the 9 months pregnant wife? What happens when the attack is broadcast on a live feed and the most powerful man in New York, the billionaire father, sees it all? This isn't just a story of love and betrayal. It's a story of a father's revenge, so brutal and so public, it brought the entire city to its knees. Stay with me as we uncover every shocking detail. The air in the Fifth Avenue penthouse was so still it felt manufactured. Evelyn Croft, née Hayes, sat on a custom-made Roche-Beaubois sofa, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach, now 39 weeks and taut as a drum. The baby, the heir, as the New York press had already dubbed him, was quiet. Evelyn wished he would kick, just to break the suffocating silence. Her apartment, if one could call the 10,000-square-foot duplex that overlooked Central Park. The view was a staggering, panoramic masterpiece of green and grey, but to Evelyn, it was just wallpaper. Everything in her life was a beautiful, cold, inanimate object, including, she often thought, her husband. Joel Croft. Even his name sounded expensive. He was the sole son of Arthur Croft, a man who didn't just own property in Manhattan, he owned Manhattan. Croft Holdings was a hydra of global shipping, high-stakes real estate, and media. Joel was the polished, handsome, Dartmouth-educated public face of the empire. He was also, for the past 6 months, a ghost in a $30,000 Brioni suit. He's in a late-night merger. His assistant, a brisk woman named Chloe, would chirp over the phone. He's flying to Singapore. He's in a sensitive negotiation. Evelyn, who had graduated top of her class from NYU Law before being swept up in this whirlwind marriage, knew sensitive negotiation was a code. It was a code for perfume that wasn't hers, for late-night texts he read with a guarded smile, for the emotional and physical chasm that had opened between them the moment the pregnancy test came back positive. She had married him for love, or at least she'd married him for the dazzling idea of love he'd presented. He had pursued her with a billionaire's focus, renting out the entire Balthazar for their 3rd date, flying in peonies from Holland in the dead of winter. It was only after the wedding, after the ink was dry on the most restrictive prenuptial agreement in the state of New York, that she realized she wasn't a wife. She was an acquisition, the final piece of his perfect life portfolio. A sharp Braxton Hicks contraction seized her, pulling a gasp from her lips. She looked at the clock. 11:00 p.m. Joel was, predictably, handling a crisis. "That's it, baby boy," she whispered to her stomach. "You and me, we need to get checked." She didn't call Joel. She called the car service. An hour later, she was being settled into the opulent garden suite at Lenox Hill Hospital, the same place where the city's royalty and Hollywood elite came to give birth. Her obstetrician, the silver-haired and famous Dr. Evelyn Reed, had been summoned from a gala. "Everything looks stable, Evelyn," Dr. Reed soothed, checking the fetal monitor. "The heartbeat is strong, but given the stress and the contractions, I want to keep you overnight, just for observation. We're almost at the finish line." Evelyn nodded, sinking into the high-thread count sheets. The nurse, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, dimmed the lights. "You get some rest. Your husband will be here in the morning, I'm sure." Evelyn just closed her eyes. "I'm sure," she lied. The observation meant she was alone, in a multi-$1,000-a-night room with a security guard posted outside. The guard wasn't for her. It was for the Croft heir. Every part of her life was a transaction, a security measure. She drifted into a fitful sleep, unaware that 2 floors below, a woman with blazing eyes and a stolen visitor's pass was arguing her way past a security checkpoint, her voice rising in hysteria. "You don't understand," the woman wept. "I'm her sister. She's not well. She called me. She needs me. Please, I have to see Evelyn Croft." The name Croft opened doors, even in the middle of the night. The flustered young security guard, intimidated by the woman's designer handbag and genuine-looking tears, eventually relented. "Room 1208, he sighed. "But you have to be quiet." "I will," said Seraphina Reed. "I promise." The click of the door woke Evelyn from her shallow sleep. She squinted at the sliver of antiseptic light from the hallway. "Patricia," she called out, her voice thick. "Is everything okay?" The door closed, locking with a soft, definitive snick. A woman stepped out of the shadows. She was not a nurse. She was beautiful, in the sharp, high-maintenance way of so many New York women. Her hair was a waterfall of salon-perfect blonde. Her body was lean and athletic under a silk blouse, and her eyes were terrifying. They were wide, red-rimmed, and fixed on Evelyn with a chilling intensity. She was holding a large, expensive-looking leather satchel. "Evelyn Croft," the woman said. Her voice was a low, vibrating hum of rage. Evelyn's hand instinctively went to the call button by her bed. "Who are you? You're not supposed to be in here. I'm calling security." "He's not coming," the woman spat, taking a step closer. "He never comes, does he? Not when it matters." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She knew, with the kind of primal certainty a woman has, exactly who this was. This was the sensitive negotiation. This was the Singapore merger. "Get out," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but finding a new edge of command. "Get out?" The woman laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "That's what he told me. Get out." After he told me he loved me. After he promised me it was me. "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn said, frantically pressing the call button. "Why wasn't Patricia coming?" "Don't lie!" the woman shrieked, lunging forward. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was holding an iPad. She shoved it inches from Evelyn's face. The screen was lit up with a live video feed. It was a baby monitor app. Evelyn stared, confused, at the grainy footage of a dark room. "It was our nursery, Evelyn," the woman cried, her face crumbling. "He set it up in my apartment. He picked out the crib. He said he was trapped. He said you were just an obligation. That the baby," she gestured wildly at Evelyn's stomach, "was just an heir. But our baby would be for love." The woman's name, Evelyn would later learn, was Seraphina Reed, a highly paid, ambitious analyst at Blackstone. And, as Evelyn was now realizing, the other woman. "He was going to leave you," Seraphina was sobbing now, pacing the room like a caged animal. "He swore it. As soon as the business of your pregnancy was over, he was going to set you up, and he and we were going to be a family. I'm sorry," Evelyn stammered, her mind racing. "This was a nightmare. This was a private hell made public." "Sorry?" Seraphina's head snapped up. "You're sorry? I was pregnant too." The words hung in the sterile air, more violent than any punch. "I was," Seraphina whispered, her hand going to her own flat stomach. 18 weeks. He said we would announce it after you gave birth. A quiet divorce. A modern family. And then I lost it. 2 weeks ago. A stress-induced miscarriage, the doctor said. And do you know where Joel was? Evelyn could barely breathe. "He was with you," Serafina hissed. "At that ridiculous polo match in the Hamptons. I called him, bleeding, and he sent me to his private doctor. He told me to handle it. He told me it was bad timing." She was close now, her hands in fists. "And then, 3 days later, he cut me off. No calls, no texts. His security blocked me from his building. He erased me. He erased our baby. But he can't erase yours." In one swift, desperate movement, Serafina lunged. She didn't hit Evelyn. She lunged for the IV pole, the one dripping Pitocin into Evelyn's arm to keep the contractions stable. "If I can't have my baby," she screamed, yanking the pole, "then neither can you." Evelyn cried out as the pole crashed, ripping the IV from her arm. The fetal monitor beside the bed went skittering. Serafina grabbed the heavy, water-filled carafe from the bedside table and raised it. It was in that precise, horrific moment that two things happened simultaneously. The call button Evelyn had been mashing finally worked, and the door burst open, revealing Nurse Patricia and the 2 Croft security guards who had been stationed down the hall. At the same time, Evelyn, trying to scramble away, felt a sickening, warm gush and a contraction so powerful it stole her breath. She looked down. There was blood in the amniotic fluid. "Placental abruption!" she heard Dr. Reed scream from the hallway, pushing past the chaos. "She's abrupting! Get her to the OR! Now! Now!" Serafina stood frozen, the water carafe still in her hand, as security swarmed her, pinning her to the wall. Her face was a mask of shock, the adrenaline of her rage replaced by the cold horror of what she'd done. As they wheeled Evelyn's gurney out of the room, past the screaming, handcuffed mistress, Evelyn's eyes fluttered. The last thing she saw before the panic and the drugs took over was a small, blinking red light in the corner of the room. A security camera. A camera that, as per Croft family protocol for any hospital stay, was on a live, encrypted feed. A feed that went directly to the personal tablet of one man. Arthur Croft. Arthur Croft did not sleep. Sleep was a concession, a waste of billable hours. At 3 a.m. he was exactly where he always was, in his climate-controlled, soundproofed study on the 80th floor of the Croft Tower, overlooking the city he considered his kingdom. He was 68 years old, with a face that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter ocean. He was reviewing mineral rights acquisitions in Bolivia when a small, dedicated tablet on his desk chimed. It was the feed from Evelyn's hospital room. He had insisted on the camera, not for sentiment, but for security. The Croft heir was a target, a potential 9-figure ransom. He watched the feed with mild annoyance. His daughter-in-law was awake, and there was a stranger in the room. He unmuted the audio just as Serafina Reed uttered the words. "I was pregnant too." Arthur Croft did not move. His face remained impassive. He listened, his gaze fixed, as this woman, this liability, laid out his son's grotesque incompetence. He heard about the nursery, the promises, the miscarriage, the polo match. He wasn't angry. Anger was an emotion, and emotions were a weakness. What he felt was a cold, clarifying contempt. His son, Joel, was not just an adulterer. That Arthur could have overlooked. Croft men had appetites. No, Joel was stupid. He was sloppy. He had created a situation with no strategic upside. He had mixed a personal vulnerability with a business asset, the heir, and produced chaos. He had allowed an unstable element to get within striking distance of the family's single most important project, the continuation of the bloodline. Then Arthur watched as Serafina Reed, in her grief-fueled rage, lunged for the IV pole. He watched his daughter-in-law cry out. He watched the blood. He watched the monitors. Before the doctors had even burst into the room, Arthur Croft was already moving. His expression never changed, but his actions were swift. He pressed a single button on his intercom. "Matteo, my study. Now." His head of security, Matteo Thorne, a former Mossad agent who had been on Arthur's payroll for 20 years, entered the room 30 seconds later. He was already dressed in a suit. Like Arthur, Matteo didn't sleep. "Sir," Matteo said, his eyes glancing at the tablet feed, which now showed the chaos of the OR prep. "A woman named Serafina Reed. Blackstone. Find out everything. Her apartment, her financials, her family, her digital footprint. I want her life on my desk in 1 hour." "Yes, sir." "Lock down the hospital. No one in or out of that wing. I want our men, not the hospitals, on Mrs. Croft's OR and recovery room." "Done, sir." "Get the hospital's legal team and CEO on the phone. They will have a statement for me in 10 minutes about their security failure. They will be prepared to make that failure." "Right. Understood." "And Matteo," Arthur said, turning to face his most trusted employee. "Find my son. Bring him to the hospital. Do not tell him why. I want him to walk in blind." Matteo nodded, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. "And the woman? Ms. Reed?" Arthur Croft looked at the frozen image of Serafina's screaming face on the tablet. "She is in the hands of the NYPD, who are en route. But they are irrelevant. I want her, contained, legally, financially, socially. I want her erased, Matteo, but I want her to know I am the one holding the eraser." Arthur's final call was to the hospital's board chairman, a man who sat on 2 of Arthur's own boards. The call was short. "Donald, Arthur, there has been an incident at Lenox Hill, a severe security breach. My daughter-in-law and my grandchild are in jeopardy." He paused. "I am disappointed. I expect a full, comprehensive and silent resolution. The reputation of your hospital depends on the health of my heir." "Do we understand each other?" The man on the other end stammered a "yes." Arthur hung up and returned to his desk. The Bolivia mineral maps were still waiting. Joel Croft was found at a high-end, unmarked club in Tribeca, celebrating a deal with 2 models and a bottle of $10,000 champagne. He was, as his father had suspected, drunk. "Mr. Croft," Matteo Thorne said, his voice cutting through the club's thumping bass. "You're needed. The car is waiting." Joel, flushed and arrogant, waved him off. "I'll be there in an hour, Matteo. Tell my father, too." Matteo didn't argue. He and the other guard simply lifted Joel by the elbows, nodded apologies to the bewildered models, and half-carried him out of the club. "What the hell is this?" Joel slurred as he was shoved into the back of a black Escalade. "You can't do this. I'll have your job." "It's your father's orders, Joel," Matteo said from the front seat, his voice flat. "We're going to the hospital." Joel's drunken bravado evaporated, replaced by a pale, sickly fear. "The baby? Is it the baby? Is Evelyn okay?" Matteo Thorne just looked at him in the rearview mirror, his eyes as cold and grey as his boss's. He said nothing. The 20-minute drive to Lenox Hill was, for Joel Croft, the longest journey of his life. Serafina Reed was not, by nature, a monster. She was a product, the daughter of a high school principal and a librarian from Ohio. She had clawed her way to the top on pure, unadulterated ambition. She had a magna cum laude degree from Penn, a prestigious MBA from Wharton, and a corner office at Blackstone before she was 30. She lived in a glass-walled apartment in Hudson Yards that she paid for herself. She wore armor, a black Alexander McQueen blazer, a steel-cased Cartier watch, and a cuttingly sharp intellect. Then she met Joel Croft at a charity gala at the Met. He had seen her, not as the predator she was in the boardroom, but as a challenge. She was, he told her, real. Not like the trust fund skeletons he usually dated. He pursued her with the same relentless focus his father pursued companies. And Serafina, for the first time in her life, let her guard down. He told her everything she needed to hear. That his marriage to Evelyn was a dynastic arrangement. That Evelyn was cold and transactional. That he was trapped by his father. The affair was a whirlwind of stolen weekends, private jets, and feverish promises. When Serafina found out she was pregnant, her first reaction was terror, her career, her independence. But Joel was ecstatic. "This is it, Sarah," he'd whispered, his hand on her stomach in her Hudson Yards apartment. "This is our way out. A new baby. A real family. My father respects family. We'll tell them. We'll handle Evelyn. We'll be together." He had bought the crib. He had held her as she cried with morning sickness. He had been, in every way, the man she'd dreamed of. The day of the polo match, she felt the first cramps. They were brutal. She called Joel. He was laughing. Background noise of clinking glasses. "Sarah, bad time. I'm with the board. Can it wait?" "No, Joel, I'm bleeding." The silence. Then his voice, cold and distant. "Go to Dr. Klein. I'll call him. He'll take care of you." Dr. Klein was a discreet doctor on Park Avenue who specialized in problems. He gave her a shot for the pain and a prescription. The miscarriage happened, violently and alone, on her Italian marble bathroom floor at 2 pezzo immolation. Joel didn't come. He sent flowers, a $5,000 bouquet of orchids. The card was unsigned. That's when she broke. The grief, mixed with the hormones and the blinding rage of betrayal, created a chemical reaction. She became unstable. She drank. She called him 50, 60 times a day. He blocked her number. She went to his building. The doorman, who used to greet her with a smile, suddenly didn't recognize her. His security stopped her at the elevator. She became, as Arthur Croft would later classify her, an unstable element. Her attack on Evelyn wasn't a plan. It was an implosion. She had gone to the hospital to see him, to confront Joel. She had assumed he would be there, playing the doting father-to-be for the cameras she was sure were present. When she was told only Mrs. Croft was there, she snapped. She had to see the woman who had everything, the woman who was about to deliver a healthy baby while hers was gone. She had to make her understand the pain. Now, sitting in a cold, fluorescent-lit holding cell at the 19th precinct, the adrenaline was gone. She was just cold. Her $2,000 silk blouse was torn and stained with hospital floor grime. Her hands were raw from the handcuffs. A detective, a tired man named O'Malley, opened the cell. "Serafina Reed, you've got a visitor. Your lawyer." Serafina wept with relief. "Oh God, thank you." "My phone. I need my phone." "He's here," O'Malley said, jerking a thumb. The man who walked in was not her corporate lawyer. It was Matteo Thorne. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in casual tactical clothes. He sat down opposite her at the metal table, placing a small, military-grade briefcase down. "Ms. Reed, I am not your lawyer. I am your new reality." "Who are you?" Serafina whispered, terrified. "I work for Arthur Croft," Matteo said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I'm here to deliver a message." He opened the briefcase. It didn't contain legal pads. It contained two things. The first was a stack of papers. "This is a civil complaint, which will be filed in 45 minutes. It's a suit for $50 million for emotional distress, assault, and battery against Mrs. Evelyn Croft and her unborn child. It names you personally." Serafina's jaw dropped. 50. I don't have that." "We know," Matteo said. "This is your notice of termination from Blackstone, effective immediately, for moral turpitude and conduct detrimental to the firm. It was sent to your partners 20 minutes ago. Your company bio is already offline. He slid another paper. This is an eviction notice from your apartment in Hudson Yards. Your lease has been terminated by the building's board, of which Mr. Croft is a majority owner, for violating the terms of your residency. You have 24 hours to vacate. Your assets are being frozen as of 5 a.m., pending the civil suit. You can't do this, Serafina screamed, lunging forward. Matteo didn't flinch. I am not finished. He pulled out the second item, a small, black, velvet-covered box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on silk, was a small gold baby's rattle. Serafina stared at it, confused. This, Matteo said, his voice dropping, was found in your apartment, purchased 3 months ago. A gift, perhaps? Serafina's breath hitched. Joel had given it to her. Our baby's first toy, he'd said. The NYPD, at our request, is searching your apartment right now. They will find, in your digital records, a pattern of harassment against Joel Croft. They will find the Baby Monitor app. They will find, in your search history, Lenox Hill Hospital, Evelyn Croft, and how to bypass hospital security. No, I was just... You will be painted as a violent, obsessed, delusional stalker. The other woman story is gone. The miscarriage story is gone. They are buried. The new, permanent story is that you are a danger to society. Matteo stood up. Mr. Croft has authorized a plea deal. The charges will be felony assault, reckless endangerment, and trespassing. You will plead guilty. You will serve a minimum of 5 years. If you do, the $50 million civil suit will be dropped. If you fight, we will use every resource to ensure you get the maximum sentence, and we will pursue the civil case until you are destitute. Your parents' home in Ohio will be in jeopardy to pay the judgment. Serafina was sobbing, a broken, animal sound. He did this. Joel, he promised. Matteo leaned in, his face inches from hers. Joel Croft is irrelevant. You made 2 mistakes. Your first was trusting a weak man. Your second and fatal mistake was becoming a problem for a strong one. He left the rattle on the table and walked out of the cell, leaving Serafina Reed's life in ashes behind him. Joel Croft stumbled out of the Escalade and into the pre-dawn chaos of the Lenox Hill loading dock. The air was cold and bit at his face, sobering him instantly. "What's going on, Matteo?" he demanded, trying to find his footing. "Where is she?" "Your wife is in surgery, Joel," Matteo said, his voice devoid of all warmth as he guided him through a service entrance. "There was an incident." "An incident? What, was it Serafina? Did she—" The look on Matteo's face confirmed it. Joel's blood turned to ice. "Oh, God. Is Evelyn okay? The baby? Is the baby okay?" "We don't know," Matteo said, steering him into a private, windowless waiting room. "Your father is on his way." "My father?" Joel's panic tripled. This was no longer a personal crisis. It was a corporate one. "He wants to see you. Wait here." Joel was left alone for 2 hours. 2 agonizing hours with no phone. Matteo had taken it. No news, and only the hum of a vending machine for company. He paced. He prayed. He cursed Serafina. He cursed himself. He cursed his father. At 6:05 a.m., the door opened. It wasn't a doctor. It was Arthur Croft, flanked by 2 lawyers Joel didn't recognize. Arthur looked as immaculate as he had at 3 a.m., his suit pressed, his tie perfect. He did not look like a man who had just learned his grandchild was in peril. He looked like a man about to close a hostile takeover. "Father," Joel stammered, standing up. What's the news?" Arthur Croft looked at his son. He didn't see his child. He saw a bad investment, a leveraged buyout gone wrong. "The boy's alive," Arthur said, his voice a low gravel. "Born at 5:17 a.m. 3 pounds 2 ounces. He's in the NICU. He is, for now, stable." Joel sagged against the wall, a wave of relief washing over him, so potent it almost made him sick. "And Evelyn? Is Evelyn okay?" "She's in recovery. She will survive." Arthur's voice was clipped. He motioned to the lawyers. "Joel," Arthur said, "I am here to inform you that, as of 6 a.m., an emergency session of the Croft Holdings Board was convened." Joel's confusion was total. "The board? Now? What? Why?" "You have been formally suspended from your position as COO, pending an internal investigation into gross misuse of company funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and conduct unbecoming an officer of this corporation." One of the lawyers, a sharp woman in a grey suit, stepped forward and handed Joel a thick binder. "Mr. Croft, these are the preliminary findings. A lease on a Hudson Yards apartment paid for from a shell corporation tied to the Singapore Development Fund. A Porsche Panamera gifted to a consultant named Serafina Reed. Over $1.5 million in expenses over the last 8 months, all directly tied to your mistress." Joel stared at the pages, his face white. "Father, this is a personal matter. You can't. You made it a corporate matter," Arthur thundered, his voice for the first time rising. "When you used my money to fund your incompetence. You made it a corporate matter when your unstable mistress assaulted the mother of the company's heir. I can fix this. I'll pay it back. Father, please. Serafina, she's sick. She lost our baby." The words died in his throat. Arthur Croft's face had gone from granite to something far colder. "She," Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is a criminal. She is currently pleading guilty to assault. She will be in prison for 5 years." "What? You can't just—" "I can," Arthur said. "And I have, but she is not the problem. You are." Arthur took a step closer, and Joel, for the first time since he was a child, physically recoiled. "You are weak, Joel. You are a liability. You have proven yourself incapable of protecting the family, incapable of protecting the legacy." Arthur turned to the lawyers. "He's served." The second lawyer handed Joel another, thinner packet. "Mr. Croft, these are divorce papers, filed on behalf of your wife, Evelyn Croft. She is suing for divorce on grounds of adultery, with a cruelty provision. She is demanding full, sole custody of the child, and the activation of the infidelity clause in your prenuptial agreement." Joel looked at the signature page. It was a scanned copy, but it was Evelyn's signature, sharp, precise, and dated that morning. "No," Joel whispered. "Evelyn, she wouldn't. She's in surgery." "I had her sign it before she went under," Arthur said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "It's done." You did this," Joel realized, a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. "This is your revenge, not on Serafina, on me." "This is not revenge, Joel," Arthur said, walking to the door. "Revenge is emotional. This is a correction, a market adjustment." He paused at the door. "You are not to see Evelyn. You are not to see the child. Your access to all Croft properties is revoked. Your credit cards have been cancelled. Matteo will escort you to a more appropriate residence downtown. A car is waiting." Father, please!" Joel was sobbing now, a pathetic, broken man. "He's my son. I'm your son." Arthur Croft looked at him one last time, his eyes utterly empty. "The boy in the NICU is my son. You are a stranger." The door closed, leaving Joel alone with the 2 lawyers and the ruins of his life. At 7 a.m., the New York Post's page 6 server crashed. The headline, fed to them by Arthur Croft's PR team, was explosive. Croft heir, born amid hospital chaos. Joel Croft ousted from empire. Wife files for divorce after violent stalker attacks maternity ward. The story, written by a Croft-friendly journalist, painted Evelyn as a tragic victim, Serafina as a deranged former employee. They'd falsely tied her to a rival firm, and Arthur Croft as the iron-willed patriarch, protecting his family by any means necessary. Joel's name was mentioned only in reference to his ousting. He had been, in the space of 3 hours, publicly and permanently executed. The entire city was in shock. Evelyn Croft woke up to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the abrasive, starchy smell of surgical blankets. Her body felt alien, a territory of deep, aching pain. There was an emptiness where the great weight of her son had been. "He's okay," a voice said. She opened her eyes. Arthur Croft was sitting in a chair by her bedside, not the sterile hospital chair, but a plush leather wingback that had clearly been brought in for him. He was in a fresh suit. "Arthur," she rasped, her throat raw from the breathing tube. "He is stable," Arthur repeated, his voice gentle, a register she had never heard him use. Arthur William Croft II, 5 pounds, 2 ounces. A fighter, the doctors say. Like his grandmother. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Joel?" "Joel has been handled," Arthur said. "He is no longer a concern. For either of us." He motioned to a small, discreetly placed folder on her bedside table. "Your lawyers," he said, "are very efficient." Evelyn stared at him. The fog of the anesthesia was clearing, and in its place, a cold, sharp clarity was forming. "You saw the feed." It wasn't a question. "I saw everything," Arthur confirmed. "And Serafina?" "She has accepted responsibility for her actions. She will be away for a long time." Evelyn processed this. The attack, the emergency C-section, the divorce, her son in the NICU. She should have been hysterical. She should have been weeping. Instead, she felt light. "It wasn't a perfect plan," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Arthur raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Plan?" "My plan," Evelyn said. "I wasn't going to divorce him until after the baby was born. I needed the baby to be a Croft, legally. I needed the leverage of the birthright." Arthur Croft, for the second time in his life, was genuinely surprised. He sat back in his chair. "You knew," he stated. "I've known for 6 months," Evelyn said. "Since the polo match. Joel is careless. He left his phone unlocked. I saw the texts to Sarah, the I love yous, the nursery pictures." A single tear traced a path down her temple, but her voice didn't waver. "I hired a private investigator. A good one. Not one of yours. One of my own. I have every receipt, every hotel bill, every wire transfer from the shell accounts. I have video of him going into her building. I even have the audio from Dr. Klein's office about her situation." Arthur's eyes widened. "How?" "My PI is ex-Shin Bet, better than your ex-Mossad," Evelyn said with a faint, wry smile. "I was going to wait. I was going to let him think he had it all, and then I was going to take it from him. The baby, the settlement, my freedom, the attack. Serafina just accelerated my timeline." She looked at her father-in-law, a man who respected only one thing: strength. "I signed the papers, Arthur," she said. "Not because you told me to, but because it was the next move in my game." There was a long, profound silence in the room. The only sound was the beep of the monitor. Arthur Croft stared at the pale, bruised woman in the bed. This was not the timid, middle-class lawyer he had approved for his son. This was not an acquisition. This was a mirror. The infidelity clause, Arthur said, grants you $50 million, the apartment, the Hamptons estate, full custody. It's a generous and final settlement. Evelyn shook her head. It's not enough. No, Arthur agreed. It is not. Joel is weak, Evelyn said, and his weakness almost cost me my son. Our heir. You need to protect the legacy. And you've just proven your only blood relative is a bad investment. What do you want, Evelyn? Arthur asked, his voice low. I don't want a settlement, Arthur. I want a partnership. She took a shaky breath. Joel is out. That leaves a power vacuum. The board is rattled. The press is having a field day. You need a new story. A better one. Go on. The story isn't billionaire's son ousted. The story is new matriarch rises. I'm the mother of the heir. I'm the victim who survived. I have a law degree, and I have a spine of steel. You've seen the evidence. I'm smarter than your son, and I'm more ruthless. What? Do you want? I want Joel's seat on the board, Evelyn said, her eyes locking on his. And I want control of the Croft Family Charitable Foundation. It's a $5 billion slush fund you've been using for social leverage and tax breaks. I'll make it a real entity, a global force. I'll make the Croft name mean something other than scandal. I'll be the face of the family, the mother, the survivor, the philanthropist. She smiled, a thin, painful smile. And in exchange, you get what you've always wanted, a gatekeeper for your legacy. Someone who will protect your grandchild and your empire with their life. Someone you can trust, because I have just as much to lose as you do. Arthur Croft was very still for a full minute. He saw it all in that instant. The chess game laid out. She was right. The city was shocked by his revenge on Joel, but this was a move no one would ever see coming. He stood up. He walked to her bedside and, for the first time, gently touched her hand. Rest, Evelyn, he said. Recover. You have a board meeting in 2 weeks. The 2 weeks that followed were not a blur of recovery. That implies a passive, gentle healing. This was a reforging. It was a brutal, strategic, and precise reconstruction of a woman, a family, and an empire. Evelyn Croft's penthouse on Fifth Avenue, once her gilded cage, was transformed. The suffocating silence was replaced by a 24/7 hum of quiet, focused activity. The Roche-Beaubois sofa, where she had once sat alone and pregnant, was now the center of a command post. On the glass coffee table, stacks of legal briefs sat beside sterilized baby bottles. A top-of-the-line encrypted video conferencing suite was installed opposite a state-of-the-art snoo bassinet, where Arthur William Croft II, Artie, as Evelyn had firmly named him, rejecting the dynastic second, slept under the watchful eye of a rotating NICU nurse. Evelyn herself was a general in a silk robe. The physical pain from the emergency C-section was a constant, searing reminder of the attack. But she used it. She channeled the pain, that raw, visceral fire, into a diamond-hard focus. She was polite to the nurses, tender to her son, and utterly ruthless with everyone else. On the 10th day, she held her first full strategy meeting. In attendance were Arthur Croft's top PR strategist, a woman named Amelia Vance, the Croft family's lead counsel, and Matteo Thorne, who now reported directly to her, on Arthur's orders. Evelyn sat in a plush armchair, Artie cradled in her arms. She was pale, but her eyes were sharp. Amelia, Evelyn began, her voice quiet but carrying. Walk me through the Forbes profile. Amelia, a woman who terrified senators, looked at her notes. The angle is the survivor. We'll focus on your resilience, your quiet strength, a soft focus shoot here in the penthouse. We'll talk about your love for your son, your gratitude to Arthur for his protection, and your plans for the future. Perhaps a small charitable initiative. Evelyn looked at her for a long, silent moment. Artie made a small, snuffling sound. "No," Evelyn said. Amelia blinked. I'm sorry? No soft focus, no quiet strength, and gratitude is the wrong word, Evelyn said, adjusting Artie's blanket. I am not a victim to be pitied. I was a target. My ordeal, as the Post so delicately put it, was a symptom of a systemic failure. A failure in security and a failure in leadership. She looked at Matteo. The narrative isn't Evelyn the survivor. It's Evelyn the new standard. It's Croft Holdings under new management. She then turned back to Amelia. The Forbes piece will be a business profile. I am not a grieving widow. I am an executive. The angle is the reorganization. We will discuss the new security protocols for the family and the new ethical protocols for the company's officers. I am not a charitable initiative. I am the new chairwoman of the Croft Foundation. And it will no longer be a tax shelter for polo sponsorships. Is that clear? Amelia, for the first time in her career, was stunned. She looked at Matteo, who simply gave a small nod. He had his orders. He was witnessing the new chain of command. Yes, Mrs. Croft, Amelia said, a new, genuine respect in her voice. The angle is executive. I'll redraft the pitch. You will, Evelyn said, and the title will be The Matriarch. Now let's talk about the board. The public execution of Joel Croft was as swift as it was total. He was the story that shocked the city, the gossip that dominated every dinner party from the Upper East Side to Wall Street. Arthur's revenge, as it was universally called, was legendary. The New York Post ran the first story, a brutal front-page splash, Croft Fall. It detailed his ousting, his cancelled credit cards, and his banishment from the family. The Forbes profile on Evelyn landed 1 week later, a masterful counter-narrative. The cover photo was not soft. She was in a navy blue Armani suit, her hair pulled back, holding Artie. Her gaze was directed at the camera, unwavering. The headline, The Matriarch, Evelyn Croft, on family, survival, and the billion-dollar future of a dynasty. The article itself was a masterpiece of spin, painting her as a brilliant legal mind who had stepped up in a crisis, a protective mother, and a formidable new partner to the patriarch, Arthur. And Joel? Joel was a ghost. He was last spotted by a single, determined paparazzi photographer who had been tipped off by someone. He was standing in the rain, outside a mid-range hotel in Murray Hill. His $30,000 Brioni suit was crumpled, his face was gaunt, and he was yelling into a prepaid cell phone. He had tried to call his old friends. The calls went to voicemail. He tried to call his mother, who lived in comfort in France on Arthur's dime. The number was disconnected. He tried to use his name to get a table, a drink, a room. Croft? The hotel concierge had sneered, looking at the post on his desk. I'm sorry, sir. That name has no credit here. He saw Evelyn's Forbes cover on a newsstand. He stared at it, the rain plastering his hair to his skull. He saw his wife holding his son in his suit. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel sadness. He felt a cold, hollowing emptiness. He realized in that moment that he had never been the protagonist of his own story. He was just the prologue to hers. Serafina Reed was less than a ghost. She was a redacted file. Her plea deal, orchestrated by Matteo and the Croft legal team, was swift. She was found mentally unfit due to her miscarriage, pleaded guilty to assault, and was quietly sent to a private, long-term care facility in upstate New York, a place with high walls and no internet access. She was a loose end, and the Crofts, under new management, did not tolerate loose ends. The climax of the 2-week war was the board meeting. It was held on the 80th floor of Croft Tower, in a room that smelled of old money, leather, and palpable fear. The 12 board members, all men over 60, sat around the obsidian table. They were all terrified. They had read the papers. Arthur Croft was on a warpath. He had butchered his own son. What would he do to a board member who had underperforming assets? They were all nervously checking their own expense reports. The doors opened. The room went silent. Arthur Croft entered, his face a mask of granite. "Good morning, gentlemen." But he was not alone. Behind him, a set of double doors was opened by a security guard, and through them came Evelyn Croft. She was not in a dress. She was in a charcoal grey suit, custom-tailored, with a high-necked silk blouse. Her hair was in a severe, perfect chignon. Her face was pale but immaculate. She looked less like a new mother and more like a warrior queen. And she was pushing a simple, elegant, black bassinet. The sound of the high-end rubber wheels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. It was a sound of profound, unbelievable audacity. The board members stared, speechless. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, taking his seat, "there is a change to the agenda. As you know, Joel Croft's seat is vacant." He gestured to Evelyn, who stood at the opposite end of the table, a new pole of power. "I propose Evelyn Hayes Croft to fill that seat." A shocked silence. Then one man, a banking scion named Robert Henderson, cleared his throat. He was the brave one. "Arthur," Henderson said, his voice straining to sound reasonable, "with all due respect to Mrs. Croft, this is a multi-billion-dollar global shipping and real estate concern, not a nursery." He chuckled nervously. No one laughed. Her ordeal. It's tragic, but it hardly qualifies her for this position. This requires experience. Evelyn let the silence hang. Then she walked from behind the bassinet to the center of the table. She looked directly at Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice not loud, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. "Thank you for your candor. My ordeal, as you call it, was not a tragedy. It was a stress test, one that this company's COO and this board's oversight failed. Utterly." She began to walk slowly around the table, her eyes scanning each man. Joel's personal matter became a corporate liability. He exposed this board, this family, and our stakeholders to catastrophic front-page risk, and none of you, in your quarterly meetings, ever saw it. Your experience saw only the P&L sheets. You didn't see the rot in the foundation. She stopped, placing her hands on the back of an empty chair. "I did. I saw it. I lived it. I am the only person in this room who understands the true, tangible cost of weak leadership. I am the only one who has been stress-tested." She looked at Henderson again. "You are correct. I have not run a shipping concern, but I am a graduate of NYU law, magna cum laude. I am the mother of the sole heir to this empire, and as of this morning, thanks to the infidelity and cruelty clause in the contract my husband was so foolish as to sign, I am the single largest non-institutional shareholder in this company. My ordeal, as you put it, Mr. Henderson, just made me your new boss." A collective intake of breath. Henderson went white. "I am not here despite being a mother," Evelyn said, her voice dropping, pulling them all in. "I am here because I am one. My priorities are not muddled by mistresses or expensive champagne. My priority is singular, the legacy, The asset. The future. The one. She gestured to the bassinet. Sleeping right over there. I am not emotional, gentlemen. I am invested. She looked at her father-in-law, down the long, obsidian expanse. No one in this room has more to protect than I do. Arthur Croft watched her. He had seen the entire attack on the video feed. He had seen her terror. Now he saw a mirror of his own ruthlessness. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The torch had been passed. Now, Evelyn said, walking to the head of the table. She didn't take Joel's seat. She took a new seat, brought in by Matteo, right at Arthur's right hand. If we are concluded with the vote, which I see as unanimous, I have my first proposal. She nodded to Matteo, who handed out thick, bound files to the stunned board members. The Croft Family Foundation is being dissolved and reconstituted, Evelyn announced. We are liquidating all sentimental assets, the polo sponsorships, the modern art collection, the museum galas. They are a waste of capital. We are redirecting all $5 billion into 3 new, high-visibility, global pillars. The board members opened the files, their faces draining of all color. 1. The Serafina's Law Initiative, a global legal aid fund for victims of intimate partner corporate harassment. A few men choked. 2. The Evelyn Croft Wing for Pediatric Trauma, a state-of-the-art wing at Lenox Hill, specializing in high-risk births under duress. And 3. The New Air Security Protocol, a think tank focused on protecting the assets and families of high-net-worth individuals from internal threats. Evelyn stood, a small, cold smile on her face. She had weaponized her trauma. She had monetized her pain. She had turned her entire nightmare into a global brand, a PR masterpiece, and a fortress. This is not just charity, gentlemen. This is our new brand. We are no longer just rich. We are invulnerable. It's a much more profitable story. I expect your full support. The meeting was adjourned. The old men filed out, shaken, their careers flashing before their eyes. Only Arthur and Evelyn remained. The baby, Artie, began to stir. Arthur looked from Evelyn to his grandson. The city was so shocked by my revenge on Joel, he mused, almost to himself. They thought I was the butcher. Evelyn picked up her son who had been born in blood and fire. She kissed his head. She looked out the window at the city, her city, sprawled out below. Don't worry, Arthur, she said, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. They'll never see the surgeon. The king was dead. Long live the queen. And just like that, the entire power structure of New York City shifted. The revenge was complete, but it wasn't the one anyone expected. It wasn't just about a father punishing his son. It was about a new power, Evelyn, rising from the ashes of betrayal, not as a victim, but as a victor. She and Arthur Croft, 2 ruthless operators, cut out the weak link and formed an alliance that would make them more powerful than ever. What do you think of this story? Who do you think was the real villain? Was it the unstable mistress, the cheating husband, or the cold-hearted father? Or was Evelyn the most ruthless of them all? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a wild one, and if you want to hear more true-life dramas and shocking tales, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.